everyone. I am Rachel Werner, the Executive Director of the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics, and it is my privilege today to introduce the Charles Layton Memorial Lecture. This is an annual lecture series that has taken place since 1994 in honor of Charles Layton. This is the first time lectures virtually, but one of the benefits we have of having done it virtually is that the Layton family has graciously agreed to introduce the Layton Lecture and provide some remembrances of Charles Layton.
Hello, my name is Pam Leighton, and Charlie Layton was my husband. I am so proud of this lecture given by a grant from Merck & Company to honor Charlie and his contributions to Merck for 25 years. The first lecture was in 1994, and Dr. David Kessler, who was then the head of the FDA, was the first speaker. It was very appropriate as Charlie had worked with Dr. Kessler personally and knew him. At that time, it took 14 years for a new drug to be approved by the FDA. Now fast forward to 2021, and President Biden has appointed Dr. Kessler to serve as the Chief Science Officer of the COVID-19 response team. What seems really remarkable is that Pfizer and Moderna and J&J were able to get their drugs approved so rapidly for the pandemic and with such high efficacy. Now I would like to briefly introduce my three children, Wendy, Christy, and Chip.
My name is Chip Layton, and I'm the youngest of Charlie Layton's three kids. I know my dad would have been so excited about this lecture series. He was a big believer in science and also a big proponent of education. So I'm sure he's been looking down and smiling at all the wonderful lectures presented here over the last 27 years at the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics. And he'd be particularly thrilled at the topic this year, which is about balancing innovation and access. He spent his career delivering medicines and vaccines to the people around the world who needed them. So a topic that considers both the public good and also pharmaceutical innovation would have been right up his alley. I know we're all looking forward to hearing the lecture today, and I thank everybody for joining.
My name is Wendy Layton, and I would like to speak about my dad's interest and passion in diversity in medicine. I fondly recall that he told me in 1992 that he was appointed to serve as chairman of the first diversity committee at Merck and wanted to discuss ideas since that was a passion of mine. I was involved at that time in the gay rights movement and advocating for treatment for those living with HIV and AIDS. He would be thrilled the Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing access to vaccines and targeting those marginalized groups like people of color, the poor, and disabled, to make sure they have access to the COVID-19 vaccine. I truly believe he would be very happy with how medicine has progressed in the past 27 years, especially with the new vaccine technology, mRNA. He was a visionary about delivering breakthrough vaccines around the world to people who needed them. I know he would be thrilled by these medical, scientific, and regulatory affairs advances in the United States and around the globe. Thank you.
My name is Christy Layton, and I'm Charlie Layton's youngest daughter. Nelson Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which can change the world." Throughout my formative years, the importance of education was always stressed to us. I've carried that philosophy throughout my life as a teacher for over 20 years. Having these memorial lectures over the past 27 years has been a wonderful way to continue the educational philosophy my father held so dear. It seems particularly appropriate to maintain this tradition during the COVID-19 epidemic. From students sitting in rows in classrooms to giving lessons in Google Meets, the look of education has changed dramatically in 2020 and is sure to continue. I know my father would be doing all he could to educate and inform others on topics such as this. Thank you so much for attending the lecture today.
Once again, I want to thank the Leonard David Institute for their efforts over 27 years to recruit renowned speakers with distinguished careers in the fields of science and medicine. It was an honor working with you, and my family and I look forward to today's first virtual lecture.
Well, thank you so much to the Layton family for providing that great introduction to this lecture. It's definitely better than any of us could have done. And so I am thrilled to begin this lecture today. I'm thrilled that they're in the audience with us today. And just want to go over a few logistics before we begin. We will be taking questions from the audience as we go along. And if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function, which is on the right side of your screen, to submit them. We will try and get to as many questions as we can as we go along, but may not get to them all. There is closed captioning available for live stream attendees to this conference. To enable it, just click on the settings icon on the right side of your screen, then check the box for closed captioning. And once it's enabled, you'll see those captions appear at the bottom of your screen. This session is being recorded, and it will be available if you're interested next week on the LDI website. You can find it by clicking on our virtual archive of seminars on our homepage. And one reminder, don't forget to register for our virtual conference, which is next week on May 7th, which will be on the promise of health reform and a public option in a Biden administration. More information for that can also be found on our website, and a link that is being posted in the Q&A right now that you can click on. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's seminar. The pandemic has shifted some of the perspectives on drug pricing and medical innovation. In the midst of a pandemic, we have seen unprecedented government funding for the development of COVID-19 tests and treatments, and of course, for the late-stage vaccine development and manufacturing capacity. We have seen the federal government negotiate vaccine prices and pre-purchase agreements, and we have seen multiple vaccines delivered to the American public at breakneck speed, with no out-of-pocket costs. This is not the way we normally fund medical innovation, bring medical therapeutics to market, or price new drugs and devices. Today, we'll talk about what's changed in response to the pandemic and what it means for our market-based system going forward. What have we learned from this experience, and how does it affect how we think about solutions to our long-standing drug prices and access problems? To talk about these questions today, we are very lucky to be joined by Dr. Stacy Dusatzina, who is an associate professor at the Department of Health Policy and Ingram Associate Professor of Cancer Research at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. Stacy is a health services researcher focusing on the intersection between health policy, epidemiology, and economics related to prescription drugs. Her work has contributed to the evidence base for the role of drug costs on patient access to care and policy changes that might improve patient access to high-priced drugs. She has been recognized for her work at a national level, and her research has been broadly covered by NPR, the New York Times, Reuters, Washington Post, and many other national outlets. And so we're very happy to have her with us today. Moderating the discussion with Stacy today will be Dan Gorenstein, who we're also very happy to have with us today. Dan is the executive producer and co-host of the Trade-Offs podcast and an LDI adjunct senior fellow here at the University of Pennsylvania. Trade-Offs combines compelling stories and rigorous research to explore solutions to some of healthcare's toughest challenges. Before launching the podcast, Dan was a senior reporter for Marketplace's Health Desk, covering business of health, and was a reporter for the New Hampshire Public Radio before that. During his 20 years as a reporter, Dan has won a number of national awards, including from the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Investigative Reporting Award. And so it's a great lineup today, and we're thrilled to have both of you joining us, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks to the Layton family for this. This is a special opportunity for you all who in attendance today. I can say as a reporter, when I was just getting my sea legs and learning about health policy, I'd always get nervous whenever I had to do a story on prescription drugs. It's a very complicated world. And when I was introduced to Stacy Dusatzina, I was thrilled because Stacy is forthright, clear, honest, rigorous, and having that kind of person here to be able to help us think about this moment in time, the vaccines, the arrangement between the United States and the drug makers, is a real special opportunity for all of us to be able to learn a little bit more than we otherwise know. I hope at the end of this, everybody feels like they've gotten a little bit more. Stacey, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks so much for the Layton family for this opportunity.
So that's just before I ask you the first question, Stacey, I just want to share with the folks on the call what the objective of this conversation is. And it is for you to share your views on how the vaccine arrangement between the United States and drug makers may influence the politics and policymaking of drug pricing going forward. So with that said, can you please, for us, set the table? What was the deal between the federal government and these drug companies?
Sure, happy to do that. So I'm going to mostly be talking about arrangements between Pfizer and Moderna and the government, just to keep things simple. Obviously, there are other companies that have products that are available and for which we've had other deals made, but we'll just keep it focused on those two for the most part. So in general, as part of Operation Warp Speed under the Trump administration, there was a contract set up to guarantee purchase of 100 million doses of each of Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines. And, these contracts were set up last summer before we knew whether these vaccines would work, and really helped to de-risk the costs to companies for really going all in on pushing to develop and test these vaccines in record time. Another consideration where the government actually had invested significantly in actually developing the vaccine. So that arrangement is quite different than Pfizer's arrangement. In both cases, we've spent about $6 billion for each, either through guaranteed contracts or through development plus the contracts. And that includes purchasing 100 million doses of each, both originally in that last summer's contract, again by the Trump administration in December, and then another group finalized in February of this year by the Biden administration. So all told, we have enough for 300 million people to be treated, or 600 million total doses across the two products.
Was that, this is a simple question, but was that a good deal? Did the U.S. get a good deal here?
So I think they did. And part of the reason is that, when we were facing this pandemic and thinking about what might happen, and especially as someone who studies the area of drug pricing and is well informed in this space, the sky could have been the limit on drug pricing. What we've seen is actually pretty responsible drug pricing. Now, these companies are still making a profit, but we're talking about approximately $20 per dose, or about $40 per person to be treated, for example, with the Pfizer vaccine, at least based on the initial contracting. And, $40 to get such a good, efficacy for these vaccines, like, what a deal. Sign me up. So I think it's been a really good deal so far. Now, whether it stays a good deal is a big question mark, and especially when we think about future needs for these same vaccines. And in fact, the industry has sort of, said these are pandemic prices. We've got a super sale going on right now, but that doesn't mean that these prices are going to last.
Pandemic prices. This is a great moment for drug makers, mostly, and they continue to sort of like bask in this glow of delivering the vaccine. How do you think the firms are looking to leverage this moment? Like, this is like some of the best PR they've ever had, right? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you looked at public polling, opinion polling about the pharmaceutical industry 2 years ago, it was the bottom of the barrel. People were rating, when they line up the different types of companies and their level of trust in these companies or how they feel about them, pharmaceutical companies were probably right around like oil and gas companies, and people typically don't have a great opinion about those companies. So I think we've seen a more positive response from the public as far as public opinion about the industry. And that's really because many of us recognize that it's an incredible feat. We've gotten very highly effective vaccines developed in record time, and it really is unbelievable. The science should be applauded, those efforts of the industry to get us here. And, to be honest, all of the scientists working on these vaccines. So yeah, there's a lot of movement in a positive direction as far as public opinion. So the pharmaceutical industry is going to want to leverage that to push back against what's going on otherwise, which is this other movement around doing something meaningful about drug prices. So there had been a lot of pressure around addressing drug prices that, the Trump administration was quite vocal about. Democrats have long been vocal about the need to rein in drug prices and spending. And so I think that, the industry can use this moment of goodwill to push back against some of those different other themes going on that are trying to push down prices. Whether that will work, kind of to be determined. If you also look at what the public's saying about drug prices, even though they really appreciate the industry right now and these efforts around the COVID vaccines, they still say the prices are too high and should be addressed. So public opinion on the prices of their drugs in general hasn't really changed.
Right. And, we heard President Biden a couple of nights ago say, and I've got the quote here, I'll just read it, "Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower prices for prescription drugs. Let's get it done this year." Now, that, it was not included in the plan that was released on Wednesday, but the rhetoric is out there. Do you think, Stacey, that this goodwill that the companies are currently enjoying is part of why that provision was not included in the plan? And I realize this is just like Stacey Doucette-Sina's opinion on this, right? But you don't have any inside information here.
That's right. It's not exactly clear to me. And this is a very rapidly moving target. Even as of this morning, there was a Stat News article expressing that Senator Ron Wyden, who's a big proponent of drug pricing reform, was saying that, he's going to try to find something that can, be a middle ground to get all of Democrats on board at least, or potentially something that's a little bit more bipartisan than some of the other bills that we saw over the last couple of years. So it does feel like a moving target. I've heard, others speculate that even though it's not included in this current package, that, it may be something that comes up for budget reconciliation. And especially the drug pricing reform bill, HR 3, that passed in the House, which was a highly partisan bill, that one has incredibly progressive drug price negotiations included that would reduce prices in Medicare, but also in commercial health plans. So it's one of the biggest sets of reforms we've seen put forward that has been discussed as a potential vehicle for budget reconciliation. That would be an enormous change. But it's not completely clear. Again, even as of this morning, it sort of sounds like that there's a big question mark around even if that would occur.
Yeah, I excuse me. I was talking to a source this week who was saying to me that one of the challenges on opening this up and allowing Medicare to negotiate is disagreement within Democrats about where those savings would go. There's some on the progressive side who are really interested in plowing that into expanded benefits within Medicare. There are some people who are more moderate that are more interested in plowing the savings into the ACA subsidies and taking other steps to shore up the Affordable Care Act. And so perhaps part of the reason why, the speculation is part of the reason why no plan was included is because Democrats aren't quite, the plan isn't quite ready for prime time.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes sense to me. That I've also heard people argue that there's so much in this package that adding something else that is so big and complex, could actually be a problem. And people have strong feelings about how far to go on drug pricing reform, and for good reason, because I think that we haven't lived in a world where we have pushed down prices specifically, so we don't know the exact effects on innovation. And that is the key conversation that comes up when we start to talk about limiting prices, is what happens to innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. And it's something that I think is important.
And thanks for setting up that next question there. I mean, this is a perennial question in drug pricing. Can we lower financial incentives and still preserve innovation? You have maintained that some amount of profit could be stripped out. Drug companies could stand to make some less amount, and in exchange, we're making drugs more affordable. And we can also continue to crank out new novel treatments. How has this grand bargain for the COVID vaccines changed your thinking, if at all, on this? And do we have any new evidence around this innovation price question?
So for the larger innovation and price question, the CBO did do an evaluation of HR 3, that drug pricing reform bill that I was just talking about, that would significantly cut prices for drugs in the US and index those to other countries. So in that estimate, they said that we would save approximately $345 billion over 10 years by doing this, and that it would cost us an estimated 8 to 15 new drugs over that same 10-year period. And that's out of an, expected potentially 300 drugs that could potentially be introduced over that same 10-year period. So, as far as those numbers don't sound like that bad of a trade-off. That's a huge amount of money to save and a pretty small number of drugs, but really kind of depends on what those drugs are that we lost. If you lost a drug that made a substantial improvement for someone with a rare type of cancer or some sort of, disease that has no other treatment options, that would be a real significant loss for society. That said, a lot of opportunities that we have to think about how do we revise the way we pay for drugs. A lot of people think that we should consider the value of those drugs and reward the right types of innovation. So pay more when a drug provides more value, pay less when it doesn't really do as much relative to the standard of care that's available. So in general, I think that, we have a pretty good sense that if we just make these decisions to pay less across the board, we may actually see some loss in innovation. Now, your other part of the question was, how did COVID change any of this? Does this actually make us think about this problem in a different way? And I actually think that COVID, while it does reinforce the importance of innovation, clearly we desperately needed an innovation in treating COVID that we didn't have on the table a year ago. But we also saw the government step up and fund both the development of some products completely and de-risk the development of others. So in a way, it sort of says, companies don't necessarily have to rely only on high prices and these, stockpiles of funds to be able to make sure they have enough money to invest in innovations when we need them. that actually we have other ways that we can pay for the innovations that we want and need when we're in a really dire situation. So I actually think it kind of makes me feel a little bit more secure in the idea of trying to do something around prices in a way that, even if it reduces innovation to some degree, if we can push to reward high value and highly innovative treatments, best case scenario would be to lose the innovation in areas where we're not getting very many gains and we're still seeing high prices, and then still have all these other opportunities to fund investments when we need, specific treatments like vaccines.
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because this is important, and trying to gather new information here is critical as the country continues to grapple with how to price prescription drugs, particularly when, vital drugs are hard to access for some people because of the price. Are you saying that now that we've seen this huge federal push to ramp up and get the drugs into the hands of people at a very low price, it says to you there is room to put downward pressure on prices. Yes, there would be some innovation sacrificed, but what the COVID-19 vaccine push has demonstrated is, if there's something we really want, we can go out and get it. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I mean, vaccines are a little different. So I think one of the other things is that, there are lots of things that are a little bit different with vaccines, and particularly this one. This is hopefully a once in all of our lifetime event with a global pandemic that has really affected our economies so much. And I think this then has slightly different rules than just, kind of your traditional drug development, where you're developing products for specific groups of patients who have specific needs. In this case, though, I think it does help us to remember that, the funds for getting true innovation when we really need it can come from more than one space. Absolutely, we need to make sure that the pharmaceutical industry stays funded and gets rewarded for innovation. I think that they play a vital role in development and production of new products. So I think that we have to recognize that and reward that. But I think there are lots of places where, we could become more lean and hopefully then create a system that provides better access for patients if we stop overpaying for many drugs.
Stacey, I want to jump back for a second to something you talked about at the beginning. You talked about pandemic pricing and how much folks are paying right now, and most of it is covered. You do not have to pay. It is free. Insurers are paying. The federal government is paying. But booster shots, how much will those cost? And we've got our first question from the audience. Thank you for sending this in. And I'll read the question. Currently, the U.S. does not allow direct price regulation of prescription drugs. Should the federal government be allowed to restrict price increases for COVID-19 vaccines in 2022, 2023, when booster shots are needed due to variants?
Yeah, great question. So Pfizer's CEO was, I believe, on an investor call where he talked about this issue of pandemic pricing and the margin that they were making on the current vaccines. And he mentioned that, ultimately that they would normally want to be getting $150 to $175 per dose. Obviously, we are more in the $20 range right now, so that's a pretty substantial jump if they were able to obtain that additional amount. And some of this is discussion around whether or not you'll need a booster, whether or not this will be more like a flu shot type of situation where, maybe they think there's some sort of endemic COVID that we want to continue to protect ourselves from over time. These are very much rapidly developing spaces, so those questions aren't answered right now, but I do think that there is some expectation that, the prices for those additional uses could go up. We've seen a little bit of evidence of this in a few weeks ago. There was a news story about Bulgaria, and they're renegotiating for prices for one of the vaccines they were using, and the price was up about 25% from the original pricing agreement. So I'm sure that there could be some more rigorous negotiations. But, one of the important points here is that the US government is acting as a single purchaser in this case, and we don't do that. Even, we're so fragmented across our different healthcare systems and payers that we don't act as one entity making purchases. So when the entire government is making a purchase on behalf of, over 300 million people that they're hoping to treat, you can leverage that size to get a good price. I think that this will be a place to see how things start to develop. The contracts around the pricing have not been super transparent, so it's actually pretty difficult to dig up the specific numbers. But I would expect, at least for booster shots, that there may be some renegotiation. I would like to see, especially if the government continues to make these purchases for the entire country, that those prices should then still be public and also reasonable.
Are you concerned if the price for these goes up? I mean, you're an economist. This seems like a super simple question, but it feels like it needs to be asked nonetheless. What would you anticipate happening if the price for booster shots went up in terms of compliance?
So, there are lots of reasons that we're seeing low uptake for some of the coronavirus vaccines now that have nothing at all to do with the price to the individual receiving them. So, I think that we have those challenges anyway. I think there is a big question of, depending on what the recommendations are and how clear the science is, how many people who've even gotten the first vaccines will want to continue to take more vaccines, especially, booster after booster. I'm not sure what that looks like, but, I think everybody has their own kind of decision-making process about getting vaccinated and then also continuing to get additional booster shots. That may mean that, when the government's thinking about making these purchases, it may mean that they're buying a smaller quantity, which then if you're not buying in bulk, still bulk would be probably hundreds of millions of doses. But like if you bought 300 million doses, maybe you can negotiate harder than if you buy 100 million. So I guess there is an opportunity then to consider that the prices would likely be higher than the prices for the current vaccine, where we have such a huge set of contracts, 100 million doses at each time we've made these contracts. That's a pretty big sale. So yeah, I think it will be something to watch. And I think in general, I have been very surprised at how the pricing was initially set, and that mostly there haven't been any surprises. Occasionally, I think probably the one exception is with the Pfizer's sixth dose issue, where initially we purchased vials with the expectation that we would have 5 doses per vial. And after finding out that in some cases individuals were able to get 6 doses, the FDA labeling was updated, and basically our contracts were reduced by a number of vials to make up for the fact that you could potentially get more doses out of them. Aside from that, I don't think there have been that many surprises.
Stacy, there have been a couple of questions from the audience around policies to address prices. What state policy options are there? Is HR 3 a good option?
So HR 3 is definitely an option that affects the most different people. So it would affect Medicare beneficiaries, it would affect people in commercial health plans. So that would actually be a significant benefit to states and the federal government because of the broad reach. The goal there is that the price negotiations, they would leverage international prices and pay a bit more than the international prices for drugs, and that price that was set would then be offered to all payers. So that then has some potential huge spillover effects onto state budgets. That said, states have also been taking a lot of steps to try to reduce spending on drugs. One of the things that they've really been targeting recently are things like unsupported price increase bills, where the idea is to go after price increases and not necessarily like the total price of the drug. But if you have a drug where its price is going up faster than inflation, and then there's no evidence supporting that that drug has improved, and has a new clinical benefit to support that price, that states could then receive a refund basically for 85%, I think is the typical estimate of the price increase. So there are ways that states are thinking about trying to push back drug price increases. It's still very difficult to manage the launch price or the initial price of a drug. So we need to do both. We need to think about how much we pay when a drug comes onto the market, and we also need to think about how to not pay so much due to price increases.
Forever and a day, it seems like there's a strong belief that people need to have skin in the game and face some out-of-pocket costs for their prescription drugs. That's not the case, obviously, with the COVID-19 vaccine. Do you think this experience will change how we collectively view copays, coinsurance for prescription drugs?
So again, I think that COVID is a little bit different and vaccinations are a little bit different because what one person does affects the health of the rest of us. So in the case of infectious disease and vaccines for reducing the spread of infectious disease, you getting a vaccine is something that I'm interested in as much as I'm interested in getting the vaccine for myself. We need everyone to get it in order to get to this point of herd immunity and really to lower the risk of having the vaccine or having the illness stay in the population. So vaccines are different. Vaccines are also typically covered under your health plan because of the Affordable Care Act. They're part of a preventive drugs list. So most people with health insurance can get vaccines at no cost to them. So in general, those drugs are treated pretty differently than most other drugs. I do think that we need to have a real consideration about what the purpose of cost sharing is. So why do we ask people to pay potentially hundreds of dollars out of pocket to fill insulin when we know that they need to take a drug like insulin to stay alive? So there are some questions about how reasonable is it to set a copay or coinsurance on a drug that patients are not going to try to go out of their way to use too much of, like cancer therapies. No one's really excited about taking cancer drugs. So the idea of putting a financial barrier in place is a little bit short-sighted. That said, right now, one of the reasons we have these arrangements is because we don't have so much control over limiting options. So on some of our health plans, we have mandatory coverage of prescription drugs. So in Medicare Part D, for example, all cancer drugs have to be covered as part of protected classes. So if you don't have any ability to leave something off of the formulary, if it doesn't provide a good value for patients, then you set up a barrier to them accessing it. And that barrier comes in the form of cost sharing.
Do you, at the end of the day, do you think COVID-19 and the vaccine will get us to think about this question differently, the sort of skin in the game? Have you seen any signs of people sort of changing behavior? And when I say people, I mean in the industry. Payers.
I haven't. No, so I haven't heard conversations about that in general. And I think part of the reason is because this is such a different case for us. This is a case where the government has decided to just take over and negotiate a contract on behalf of all of us and make it free for all of us. I think that because the rest of the system that we're in includes things like our employer-sponsored health plans, and they're making different decisions, many of which are things like, let's add a big deductible, and let's require you to pay more out of pocket before your benefits kick in because your employer needs your premium to be lower. So I think in the big picture, what we've seen over the years is just kind of this erosion of health insurance coverage where patients are being asked to pay more, people on the health plan are being asked to pay more. And I think coupling that with what we've seen on trends in drug prices, it's kind of gotten us to a point where I think we're all recognizing that it's too expensive. And we're not getting as much for our healthcare dollars, especially when we think about how much we're paying for health insurance and, what we get for that. I think that until we can get to a point, so like these dynamics look really different on each type of payer. And that again goes back to how COVID is different. If COVID looks like we're acting as a single payer system, and then the rest of our healthcare is not at all like that. So I'm not sure how easy it'll translate over. Do I hope it will? Yes, I think it would be great if more of us had easier access to prescriptions, and particularly for people right now who've lost their jobs and who don't, have health insurance because of the current economic downturn. It is important to recognize that those individuals don't have access to the other drugs that they needed. They may have access to the COVID vaccine because that's being provided free of charge. But, why do we take that same group of patients and we make it impossible for them to afford their other treatments that they need, maybe even more than they need the COVID vaccine?
Just for folks out there who've got questions, we have about 8 minutes left in this session. And so get those questions in, please. Stacy, on this topic, we do have a question, a couple questions about generics unrelated to vaccines. The FDA, one question, how can the FDA expedite the release of generic drugs? We know that there's been actually some consternation around how quickly the FDA has approved certain drugs. And then also, what about for specialty generics? But let's just talk about the FDA and expediting generics and what is it going to take to get more generic competition into the system?
So, over the last several years, the FDA has done an incredible job of moving generic approvals through the pipeline. And in fact, I think they were basically breaking records for the most generic drug approvals than in any prior years. So, to some extent, we have very good generic approval. We have a pretty significant number of generic competitors for many drugs, which then is what we need to drive down those prices. But there are still a lot of challenges, and part of this can be related to how the pharmaceutical industry kind of reacts when they have a drug that's going to be losing patent protection. And some of this is trying to shift people onto more expensive drugs that are brand name drugs in advance of losing patent protection. We hear a lot about these issues around having patent thickets, so these like huge number of patents on some products, so that you basically are dodging generic entry, like they can't break through and get their products onto the market. And then we have still, kind of these arrangements of trying to keep the generics off the market, these pay for delay types of deals, although those are not legal. These are not allowed anymore. These can still look like they're probably happening in some cases, although dollars aren't necessarily changing hands. I think that makes it really hard. And when we look at drugs that are specialty drugs or these really expensive treatments, we have these problems compounded. So we have small patient groups who are receiving the drugs, so maybe we don't have as many head-to-head competitors in the generic market. The price doesn't come down as fast. And then we've done work, and others as well have shown that in some parts of like Medicare Part D, for example, patients may actually pay more for the generics than they do for the brands if the prices don't drop as fast as we would like. So generics are one thing that we should continue to invest in and push, but I think that the solutions to drug pricing and access can't just focus on generic entry.
Another question from the audience, to what extent do you believe that allowing Medicare to negotiate will actually result in significant savings? And obviously, this is something that has been scored by, I believe, the CBO. But what can you just sort of set the table for us there? What is projected? What do the models suggest?
So I don't have the specific number off the top of my head, but one of the things that I think is not fully recognized when we talk about Medicare negotiating is that there is negotiation that happens among the private plans that operate the Medicare Part D benefit, at least. So there is negotiation that occurs through pharmacy benefits managers that lower the spending for both the health plan sponsor and Medicare. So it's not that Medicare doesn't negotiate for Part D today, it's that they don't purchase on behalf of all Medicare beneficiaries. So it's fragmented, but those individual companies that run those programs have huge market share. So there are a few dominant companies that are negotiating on behalf of a very large number of beneficiaries. So there is negotiation that occurs. I think whether or not it's successful really depends on, some of the rules that are in place today. So one place where negotiations are not very successful today is for specialty drugs, like cancer drugs in particular. So again, they're part of protected classes, which mean that Medicare has to cover them. And as we all know, if you've ever negotiated for anything, your ability to walk away from the deal is your leverage. So if you are, so I kind of have always given the example of if I need to go and negotiate for a car before Uber and Lyft existed, I wouldn't just have someone drop me off at the car dealership. So my only way out of there is with a car. I lose my leverage. Like they know I don't have the leverage I need to just leave. In this case, we've sort of done that with the Medicare program and with other policies that require coverage because we can't walk away. They have to be on the formularies. So then you can't really negotiate as much as we would like.
And another question from the audience here. Where do you see funding for innovation coming from for diseases where the unmet need is not as dire as it is with COVID-19? And that goes back to that conversation that we were having earlier. Do you worry that in a situation where it's not that sort of 20-point font sort of problem, but it's sort of a smaller specialty disease.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to have to continue to invest in a diverse strategy for dealing with diseases. So, you could actually look at the history of the COVID vaccines to look at a lot of drug development around coronavirus vaccines was really based on, NIH funding and academic labs really working on some of these problems for a long time. So I think that we will still want to see partnerships through the NIH and through academic institutions, for example, for doing a lot of basic science that starts to lay the groundwork for moving something forward as a product that could be approved by the FDA. So I think we'll want to continue to think about those partnerships and diversify the sources of funding that are going towards drug development. I think that it is an important point that we can't just expect the government to, provide such a huge investment anytime we identify a problem, but we could fix some current policies that aren't working as well as they should. So the Orphan Drug Act is one that gets criticized a lot as a pathway that has been abused because the original intent there was to provide incentives for developing drugs for rare disease where there wasn't really a hope of obtaining a profit. So we could think about how could we improve that pathway to really improve incentives in these cases where we have rare diseases or diseases where we need to really encourage more innovation, but we're not really hitting the right note with our policies today.
So as we begin to wrap up, Stacy, as you think about this time with COVID-19, if you were to look forward, what's your theory? How does ultimately, will we see new policies around drug pricing as a result of going through this pandemic? Or will this be sort of an anomalous time and we'll go back to business as usual?
I really don't want to end with a business as usual type of attitude, because I think that we've learned some really important things through COVID-19. I guess one thing that I'm hopeful for is there have been a couple of places in drug development where we've just been stuck because our current system doesn't work. So one example is developing antibiotics for antibiotic resistance. And this is an area where we've had significant problems because the idea is to develop a treatment that no one uses except in a very last resort situation. And our current system is not built to reward a product that is approved to not have sales. So what I'm hopeful for is that, this opportunity has provided us with some kind of outside of the box thinking about how to reward innovation and think about future needs, and not just think about what we need today, but, really being prepared for the next pandemic or being prepared for antibiotic resistance. So I'm hopeful that some of those things will come out and help us to improve our systems moving forward. I think in a lot of ways, it feels a little bit like 2019 in some ways on the drug pricing discussions and agendas. So I think the makeup of Congress and President Biden's leadership, we'll see what happens this year. I think there will be some activity on drug pricing. I guess right now I feel like it may look a little more like 2019 than it did like 2020, but I'm excited for the future, and I think that can include rewarding innovative drugs and also making drugs more accessible to patients.
And so do you think there, from a public health standpoint, this marshaling of federal resources to really go after the virus. Could you imagine similar efforts going forward in a more sustained way? You talk about antibiotic resistance, for example, which is something that I believe I saw some number earlier this week. I think it killed hundreds of thousands of people every year. It's a serious problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably like many people in public health, what I hope we learn from this is to be more prepared for the future. But then I think there's always pressures around just managing the day to day. And, as a country, we have a lot of priorities. We want to get people back to work. We want to try to create, improve our infrastructure. There are many other things where our dollars are being earmarked and that are very high priority. So I think one of the questions will be is how much have we learned as a result of going through this experience with the pandemic that would help us to really think about saving for a rainy day. So I think part of it is about like spending now versus spending, to ensure our future.
Final question. You said we've learned some really important things through this pandemic. If I put it to you, what is the one thing that you think is the most important lesson that has been learned? And as it pertains to drug pricing.
I think that when we set our minds to something as a country, we can make incredible things happen. The development of that vaccine in record time, the efficacy, and, it's just a testament to science and to, all the hard work that went into it. So I think that what we've seen is that we can have real cooperation, getting a vaccine at a fair price that can really help to get us out of this mess. Like, I don't think if you had asked me a year ago, I wouldn't have been nearly as optimistic about us having gotten to that point by the end of last year, and certainly wouldn't have believed that we would be able to have such an effective vaccine and be in this place right now. So, I think it shows that we can all come together and we can get the best out of industry. We can get the best out of, our partnership between the academy, the government funding, and industry working together. And I think we've seen that through COVID vaccine development.
Thank you. And as you allude to, right, part of the reason this was able to happen as quickly as it was is because of all the bench science that the federal government had invested in previously that people were able to take advantage of and move on so quickly. Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with all of us today. We really appreciate your insights and your information and your clarity. Rachel?
It was a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you both for being here. I just want to wrap up by thanking you for this great conversation today. I want to thank all the audience members who tuned in, and I particularly want to send a warm thank you to the Layton family for sponsoring this lecture. What a wonderful opportunity it was for us to hear from Stacey and Dan about this important issue. I hope that we see you all again soon. Take care.